Welcome back, YouTube. We are back with another video today, and today's video is 5 things to consider before moving off-grid. Now, before we get into this, it's going to be all depend on what you define as off-grid. Some people will define off-grid as living in a tent, and some people will define off-grid as living as modern as possible. And that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today, is living more of a modern off-grid lifestyle as opposed to just putting in a tent and you're good to go, which I'm not saying that's a wrong way to go or shaming anyone that's doing it, because anyone that just lives in a tent, hey, that's a skill on its own. So let's start off with number 1, and that would be finances. Before you move off-grid, make sure you have your finances in order, and you should have that on the daily anyways, but it all depends on, do you want to move into a house that doesn't have any power and that you got to put in a solar system or a water hydration or hydroelectric station, or are you just going to run things off generators? That's one thing you're going to have to consider. How big is the house that you're looking to move in? Is it going to be big enough for everyone, or are you going to have to build an addition? And when are you going to build the addition, and using what kind of lumber? Are you going to go out and purchase your lumber, because of this, the price of lumber these days, it's going to cost an arm and a leg? Or what some people do out here is mill their own wood, and that's the cheaper way of doing things. The second part of finances would be your income. How are you going to generate income? I know with the current situation in the world nowadays, many people are working remotely and don't have to go to an office. They don't have to go into punch a clock. And there's also different ways of earning income these days, such as online. So you can run a business such as Kimberly. You could do YouTube videos, join Amazon Associates. You can be a private investing. Yeah, you can do private invest in the stock market and get dividends. Private investing, if you don't know about that, you can lend money to people that have real estate projects on the go, and things of that nature. So finances, I would say, is number 1 before you even think about getting out into the off-grid lifestyle.
Yeah, because you have to make sure that you have some sort of income that's coming in on a daily basis. So Andre just kind of listed a few ideas that are for income that aren't even jobs necessarily, but if you have a job, like he said, there's lots of remote work that's going on nowadays, so not everybody goes into work. You can work from home, so even if you don't have a job, those are other opportunities for you to kind of get into starting your own thing and making sure you have income, because living off-grid is less expensive, yes, but you do need to still have a continual income, because you do still have bills, and everybody needs money these days. You can't live in this world without money. Depending on
how big your community is, you can sell some livestock too. Like, think about it. It's not just a matter of just punching a clock these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think so. So the second thing that we think is really important, and a really important thing for you to consider before you move off-grid, is your location. And just speaking briefly on location, just in general, just talking about climate and talking about where exactly in the world you want to be. If you're somewhere that's in the north, such as we are, where we are, you have to consider the amount of snow that you get. You have to consider the amount of the growing season, or the shortness of the growing season. If you're somewhere like, I don't know the weather in North Carolina, but if you're somewhere that's closer to the south, that's a little bit closer to the equator, has a longer growing season, it's a little warmer, and you have different challenges that you face there. So wherever you're planning on moving off-grid to, make sure that you've done your thorough research on where it is that you're going for the location of it, because you want to make sure you're aware of all of the possible complications or repercussions, and that you've taken everything that you can take into consideration into account. Obviously there's things that you may not think about, but you just want to be as prepared as possible. So looking at the climate of your future home would be something that's really important.
One thing I'd like to elaborate on climate also that not many people think of is something that you've actually noticed moving out to a different climate is moving across Canada. Her asthma and allergies were horrific in Ontario, and coming out here, we can't say that they're completely gone, but they're
a lot better.
Yeah, severely diminished in how bad it actually gets. So also consider like where you're going to be living. Are you going to be around a lot of pollen, dry air, more moist air?
Yeah, and if that's something that's a concern for you.
That's right, absolutely. The third topic we'd like to talk about is your geographical layout. What resources do you have on the property itself? Do you have water on site? That could be either spring-fed, a well, a river that you can get water from and boil it yourself, and just to kind of get all the bacteria out of it. Do you like a lot of people living off grid? You're going to be heating your place with wood. Now, here in the Rockies, we have no issue with getting wood, but if you're living out in the prairies or somewhere where it's just completely open land, where are you going to get your wood from?
It's going to be a different story.
That's something to take in consideration. And what kind of food do you have around that can make your life easier? So we have a lot of different types of berries around here, apple trees. We also have a lot of wildlife that we can sustain on, such as different types of bird, game, you name it, and then fish as well. So also understand what kind of resources you have in that area that you're going to be moving to.
Yeah. So on that note, talking about food, yes, as Andre said, there is an importance that needs to be taken into consideration with the type of area that you're living in. What kinds of food naturally does that area offer you? If you are living off-grid and you're homesteading, the understanding is that you're living closer to Mother Nature. So hopefully you're trying to be as responsible as possible with your food intake and whatnot. But you want to take a look at what kind of animals are around for hunting, what kind of fishing opportunities are available, and what sorts of things you can do in terms of living off of the land. Another thing for living off of the land, when you are homesteading, and even if you're not, excuse me, even if you're not homesteading and you live in the city, talking about growing your own food. When you can grow your own food, be it potatoes or vegetables or fruits or whatever, what have you, it's a much different, it's a much more rewarding system than if you were to go to the grocery store and to get it. Not to mention, you have been taking care of everything, you know where it comes from, and you have a bit of a closer relationship with your food. So growing your own food is something that's really important. In that sense, you want to make sure that you have good soil where you are. You want to make sure you obviously have a water source if you have plants, and just the things that we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of your geographical layout. One more thing that we'd like to mention in terms of food is your proximity to groceries. Now, as far off the grid as you want to get, and I know there are people that live far off the grid and don't go to the grocery store hardly at all, but for most people, you're going to have to visit the grocery store and just get your basic baking essentials, even if you're living off the grid. Even if you want to bake your bread from scratch, which I've done before, if you want to bake anything from scratch, you're still going to need those ingredients, unless you're lucky enough to live in a community where people around you have those supplies and have those products. If you need grain, you can go get it from your wheat farmer or what have you. Not everyone's in that situation. A lot of people who live off grid are not, and they don't have the resources necessarily to grow everything else by themselves. So something that you need to consider is your proximity to the grocery store, and how often you need to be going to the grocery store. For us, we don't go to the grocery store all that often, and when we do, it's a planned trip so that we know what we're getting and we make sure that we have enough and that we're all stocked up for everything. If you live closer to the grocery store, then that might not be as big of a problem for you or as big of a challenge, but that is something to take into consideration.
That's right. Well said. And our final point that we'd like to make is safety and medical. And those things are kind of the things that you don't really think about, you have to think about, but many people think of these other 4 items before they get into safety medical, and then kind of figure it out when they get out there. But I think safety and medical should be at the forefront of everything.
Absolutely.
So you need to take into consideration the distance from a hospital that you're going to be. Do you need to go to the hospital or to a doctor's office every a week or every couple of days, depending on if you have diabetes or you have to have some sort of procedure done? Now, also, if you get hurt, how far is the hospital that you're from? For instance, we are, like Kimberly said, hours away from a hospital, and if anything does happen, yes, we do have the availability of getting a helicopter in. However, that's still about an hour to 2 hours away from getting to you.
If they get on it right away.
If they get on it right away.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to consider also. Weapons would be a good thing too for safety. That can be anything from your crossbow to a compound bow to actual firearms. And it depends on what you prefer to have, what kind of licenses you need to go out and get to have certain weapons. You can even have a machete. That'll keep things away
really
from
well.
you. Yeah, absolutely.
Depending on where you live, too, you might need different kinds of weapons.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. So, for instance, you probably want to have some sort of bow around just so that you can reuse and not waste ammunition, because these days ammunition is a little scarce, and I think there's a little bit of a shortage on that. But also you're going to want something, if you have big game, you're going to want some sort of shotgun or a high-powered rifle to take down those big game. Or if you don't have big game where you are, you may want something smaller just to keep rodents and pests away. You never know, or some sort of varmints. Another safety measure that you can have, and also that relates back to medical, is animals. So you can have dogs like we have as safety on the property, but at the same time you're going to need to know how to treat them medically if something happens. So they can be used as an advantage, but also be a disadvantage depending on the scenario that you're looking at. Certain time, there's been a couple incidents where Tank there, he's gone after a porcupine, and he came back home with quills all over his mouth, and you have to deal with it. So that wasn't a serious medical issue. However, that is something that you're going to have to be able to treat and not panic when you do see it, and kind of settle yourself down and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And also, just for yourselves, like, you're gonna need first aid kits. You're gonna need to know some sort of background on how to stitch yourself up if you cut yourself very bad, or if you get sick, how to recuperate and get better. And also, you're gonna want to know what type of community members are available and what type of knowledge that they have. For instance, I have went back in the day to swimming school and was almost a lifeguard, and I was taught a lot in first aid. We also have a community member here who used to be a paramedic, and yes, he doesn't have his licenses or practice or whatever you want to call it up to date or anymore. He doesn't do paramedic work anymore. But that's knowledge that he does not forget, or you would hope he doesn't forget, or if something happens, that knowledge comes back. So someone having knowledge of something in the medical field or in safety, that's a huge plus, I would say, in any off-grid homesteading survival scenario.
Type of scenario, mm-hmm. Yeah. And as isolated as you might be living off-grid in your own little kind of bubble, again, looking at the population around you is really important, because you do have to deal with people in some sense, and you want to make sure that you know who's around you. And in the case of safety and medical, that can be a really big asset.
That's right.
Yeah. So those are our 5 top things, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you guys have any suggestions or comments, or maybe you think of something that we didn't think of that's not on this list, leave us a comment down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one.